We're finally back with more Battlebots content. God, I don't know how long it's been, but Battlebots was finally able to upload and show to the world the Vegas All-Stars event. We have been waiting for this for ages. Honestly, it almost became mythical. There had been so much talk about some of the fights that took place, some of the robots, pretty much every robot that is in this are ones that we consider such a big deal, at least I certainly do so, and I know a lot of you will as well, that it seemed crazy that this was seemingly just lost media for a long time. But Battlebots was finally able to bring it out to the world. But does it live up to the hype that the community built for it? There's only one way to find out. Let's get into this Battlebots Vegas All-Stars review. We start off with a flashy intro with enough text flying on screen that would capture the attention of even the most jaded TikTok scroller. It is a bit much for me. We then get a quick look at the tournament. In the first round we have Blip versus Whiplash, Tombstone versus Hypershock, Cobalt versus Scorpios, and Hydra versus Mad Catter. Honestly, some pretty cool fights that I'd be excited to see on any normal episode of Battlebots. Hell, I'd expect half of those to be main events. Commentary is taken up by Chris Rose and Will Bales, which surprised me. We'll get into how Will did at the end of the video though. Of course, we do end up seeing the age of the actual event, as they talk about Blip or Aaron never losing and Tantrum making it to the semi-finals as if that was Tantrum's biggest achievement. It's then followed up by a quick showcase of Whiplash. Of course, both of these showcases are just meant to be quick introductions, but almost feel more like quick refreshers. I feel like if someone wasn't brand new to Battlebots, they may get a little lost, but if you're a returning viewer, it's a nice thing to get you in the mood for the first match, and it certainly worked on me. I was more than ready for this. Now, Blip struggles in the beginning, with Whiplash having proto-piano keys, but soon Blip gets around, sending the lifter flying with some exceptional flips. Whiplash is definitely not driving at its best, as Blip is running circles around them, but evidently it isn't so much driver error, as issues with Whiplash itself. As they approach the shelf, it becomes obvious that the drive has fully died. Still, Blip putting on a show keeps throwing Whiplash around until finally sending them onto the shelf to be counted out. Now, typically flips are a lot less damaging, so I can imagine that's why it was okay for Blip to keep going after Whiplash was clearly down and out. You know, as opposed to a big spinner. Overall, this wasn't a bad fight, but only purely because of Blip. Blip was so dominant, and a great flipper showcase is always going to be appealing to me, so them throwing around Whiplash, even though Whiplash was clearly done, did manage to stop this from being a bit of a disappointment. Next up, we had Tombstone versus Hypershock. The match starts with both Tombstone and Hypershock getting up to speed before Hypershock rams into Tombstone. Now, Tombstone already takes some notable damage beginning to smoke, but Tombstone isn't going to go down just like that, as it chases Hypershock down and begins attacking in return. Still, Alex gets back to being the aggressor and actually ends up taking out Tombstone's spinner, completely removing it from the equation of the match. Even when Hypershock lost a wheel, it kept doggedly pursuing Tombstone. However, once it came down to 2 wheels, it became a lot more difficult to chase Tombstone down, especially with Tombstone basically creating a smoke screen. The fog of war returns. This made the fight grind to a halt, however, as Tombstone and Hypershock can barely even be seen, let alone attack each other. The fight in the final minute has Hypershock catch on fire, and given that both robots have no weapon and only 2 wheels each, the fight finally grinds to a halt as Tombstone finally breaks down and is counted out in the very final seconds of the match. Now, this fight admittedly is gotta be a highlight of the entire event. It's explosive with some great hits, but it does peter out towards the end. That is kind of the risk you take when you have spinners that powerful. You risk them just blowing themselves up in the first moments, and then if the fight keeps going, then there's not much else that they can do. But it still has enough that I think it's a pretty decently entertaining fight. Next up was Cobalt versus Scorpios, and the match starts with Scorpios getting caught up in the kill saw slots. Those forks look impressive, but they took some getting used to. Still, they easily got under Cobalt's piano keys, and given Cobalt needs ground clearance pretty much more than any other vertical spinner I've ever seen, it just can't afford Scorpios taking them off like they are. Still, Cobalt did begin fighting back in a major way, bending Scorpios' forks with several nasty hits. Soon they took Scorpios' spinner out of the equation as well. Now Scorpios does do a pretty good job of enduring, for the most part, despite some of the nasty damage it takes. In fact, despite some sparks and some nasty digs, when the knockout shot does happen, it happens so close to the 3-minute mark that it ends up going to the judges. However, the result still remains the same, as Cobalt undoubtedly took the win in this one. Overall, this was a pretty good fight. Now sadly for Scorpios, it was pretty much taken out of the running very quickly, as Cobalt has such a nasty vertical spinner. And the driving from Matt Maxim was incredibly entertaining as ever. There's just something about the way he drives robots that always seems to make for a hell of a show, in my opinion. Anyway, we move on to the last match of round 1. It's Hydra versus Mad Catter. Hydra, in a surprising moment, rushed for Mad Catter, not something we usually see from Hydra against a vertical spinner, and immediately it backfires as they got dug into by Mad Catter. Hydra tries to fight back as pieces of it gets flung into the lights, and eventually get a small flip in, which actually seems to help Mad Catter to lose a fork. With that fork gone, it's a lot easier for Hydra to get around and under Mad Catter. Doing that, they ram Mad Catter into the screws, and with a little mini flip, Mad Catter not only gets flipped up onto the screws, but ends up getting jammed. With that, Mad Catter can't move and is canned out, giving the win to Hydra. A bit of a disappointing fight, ending before it really began. Just as it was getting good, it's already over. But I feel like either way the fight would have probably been pretty quick, as Hydra doesn't typically survive too well when taking spinner blows, so I gotta give it to Hydra. So if it's gonna go quick, then for Hydra's sake, they need to end it in their favour. So I can totally see why this fight went the way it did. Next up was Blip versus Hypershock. There's a bit of a tentative start, with Blip getting under Hypershock a few times, with Hypershock backing off each time, ensuring that there's no chance Blip is getting a major flip in. And that pays off as Hypershock does get a little bit of a tap in with their spinner, although Blip does manage to then retaliate with a flip to Hypershock. Alex focuses on self-righting and ends up using the shelf to do so, though their drive is clearly a little worse for wear. I can imagine doing that big ram into the shelf probably wasn't too great for Hypershock's health. Now, at first, I assumed that Blip was just hanging back, trying to keep an entertaining show going. They'd let Hypershock self-right so they could then go back to fighting. Some builders do that. That wasn't the case. Blip had actually broken down, and that was the end of the fight. Honestly, this might have been the most disappointing fight of the episode. It's a shame, really, because once again, just as soon as the fight began building up, it was over, and it wasn't even in a very spectacular way either. Oh, major shame, major shame. Next up was Cobalt versus Hydra, and I was immediately worried for Hydra heading into this one, based on the last time I saw Cobalt fight a flipper in Lucky. But again, one bad move ended the fight in seconds. So what ended up happening was, the two are going for each other. You can see Cobalt, it's got its spinner going really fast, to the point where it's actually gyroing. And that's the problem. Because even though they've got the piano keys, Hydra is able to get under Cobalt, and with one flip, Cobalt is flipped out of the arena. Now, this isn't much of a fight. I'm going to state that right here. I'm not here going to be like, oh, this fight was amazing. No, it wasn't much of a fight. But when I see clever driving like that, I am not displeased. I had a blast with this one because it was just so smart. If a fight, again, is going to be quick, it's good to be smart about it. And Hydra is being driven incredibly smart throughout this. Hydra versus Mad Catter was quick, but again, incredibly smartly driven, so I'm not too disappointed. And Cobalt versus Hydra was so expertly done that I can't help but just be impressed. Besides Hydra being one of the most powerful flippers we've seen in Battlebots However, this is another side to Hydra that I don't think gets paid enough attention to, that calculated side, which, yes, can frustrate, like in the fight against Ribbot, where Hydra is clearly so unsure what to do that, like, nothing is happening. But at the same time, when it works out, Jake absolutely knows when to pounce and when he senses weakness. And that is both terrifying and entertaining. Before we get to the grand final, we actually do get a bonus fight though. It's Malice versus Jackpot. Now Jackpot tried something different, actually having its 2 diamond spinners out of alignment with each other. I'm guessing trying to get a few more attacks in at once. Not really sure, but I'm sure it made sense at the time. Meanwhile, Malice was going for their more typical approach that we're used to seeing with them. The two chase each other down, getting up to speed, but clearly Malice gets the better as Jackpot is sent into the wall, propped up against it, and basically losing its spinner right out of the gate. They try using their Stream Mech to get free as Malice goes in for some more damage, and it's clear they couldn't self-right as their Stream Mech was now very badly damaged. And just as the fight looked like it was going to be over, Malice actually slams into them one more time to get them back on their feet. Now, even though Jackpot is still alive and still in the fight, they don't have much, if any, life in their spinner as it only briefly spins a little bit, and clearly not enough to do anything. So it's just Jackpot driving around as Malice continues plucking away at them, taking little chunks off, bits of Jackpot flying across the arena, and Jackpot slowly but surely eventually dies in the 3rd minute of the match, getting themselves counted out after they're flipped over by Malice with one last major shot. Honestly, this is a strong contender for match of the night for me. Jackpot didn't do a whole lot, but I've really come to love Malice's approach in the arena. It's not going for like that absolute most devastating hit of all time that you might see from like a Tombstone or a Bloodsport or a Riptide or any of those types of robots. It's going for something that can still pack a mean punch, but is designed in a way that allows it to have fun, competitive matches against almost anyone. You're not going to have a situation like, as much as I love Tombstone, where Tombstone dies and then can't really do much else. Malice feels like Malice is the type of robot that can pull up a decent fight 99% of the time, I feel. And I've really come to appreciate that from them. So, yeah, this is one of my favourite matches of the event. But it's time for the grand final. Hypershock versus Hydra. Now, Hydra and Hypershock both race out. Again, Hydra being uncharacteristically aggressive. And while they do get a flip on Hypershock, it very quickly goes sideways as Hypershock recovers and starts landing some nasty attacks on Hydra. Hydra keeps going though, as they manage to flip Hypershock over. And it turns out Hypershock ended up losing one of the ears on the top of the robot. You know, those little things that make it so that once you're flipped over, you can still keep moving and your spinner can keep going. They lost one of those, meaning that Hypershock was really struggling because now it was just dragging itself along its spinner. They were eventually flipped back over by Hydra, and Hydra ends up paying dearly for that as Hypershock goes in for another nasty attack, though Hydra once again sends them flying. Now, even though Hypershock is clearly struggling now that they've been flipped over again, and actually managed to drive themselves back onto Hydra's flipper just to get sent flying once more, Hydra very evidently has stopped moving. Much like the Blip versus Hypershock fight, the flipper has broken down with next to no drive, leaving them to take a while to barely even turn. Jake is trying everything at this stage. You can see the drive twitching, you can see the flipper being fired occasionally, likely to see if like they can dislodge themselves, kind of like how I play Robot Arena 2 or Robot Rumble 2, where I'm like, oh no, I can't move, let me just jam everything to see if that'll work. Despite that, Hypershock is still showing way more movement and Hydra is counted out, giving the fight to Hypershock. Man, it's a good fight. It's a pretty good fight, but I can't lie, Hydra was definitely the more dominant, and I can't say that I'm not disappointed to see Hydra go out like that. Given how well it was doing, oh man. But Hypershock was also a very entertaining robot in this tournament. So I can't say that it's a good robot to have won the tournament. I just was like, man, it would have been good if Hydra won that. But what do I think of the event overall? Overall, it's not bad. It's definitely nowhere near on the par of the main seasons. We're not seeing the robots going into like crazy back and forths. We're not going to see like those major performances that you might see like on any episode where it's some blow away performance that we're going to be talking about for weeks and weeks. A lot of the fights were pretty entertaining in their own little ways. Like I said, I gotta say Hydra was my favorite throughout this tournament. Every single one of their fights had a little bit of entertainment value for my liking. And Hypershock, of course, was entertaining in its own right. And a lot of the other fights, such as Tombstone versus Hypershock and the bonus fight in Malice versus Jackpot, were also pretty good. As long as you're not expecting this to be on the same level as, say, a World Championship 7, you absolutely should check this out. As for how Will did fine enough. It definitely seems to be like the format that they would use when they would add a builder into the commentary team to give their insight. But you really need Chris and Kenny here, in my opinion. Having that void is difficult to fill, so I do not envy Will Bales for being in that position. He did the best he could, but it just wasn't Chris and Kenny for me. So while maybe not the most shining recommendation of all time, because some of the fights really were disappointing, some of the fights feel like they could have been just that little bit greater, I still had a lot of fun with this, and I'd still give it a recommendation nonetheless. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review. What did you think of Vegas All-Stars? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? I have heard some people were pretty disappointed with this event. I can see why, especially with all the hype that the community really built around this. Like, it might have set expectations just a little too high, but for me, I found it to be a fun, enjoyable little experience. But that's why I like hearing the discussion in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this review if you enjoyed it, by the way. I massively appreciate that. Consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell to be notified of future videos on the channel. Share this video around with your friends, and consider supporting the channel by donating or hitting the join button. By becoming a member, you get access to custom emotes and members-only videos. With that all being said, I will see you all next time. Bye, guys!